I'm going to start out, I think, just me. I need to
Okay.
get this beautiful
Yeah.
face in front of my audience. They're comfortable with this. I don't want to introduce them to the scary black man right away. Um,
Yeah. Have you ever thought of being a comedian at all?
no. Are black people inherently violent? The concept of the exceptional Negro. Do black Americans have a lower IQ than white Europeans? The truth about black culture in America.
Mr. Reagan.
All right, so today I have decided to create a somewhat brutal exploration of American culture. American culture you can split up into a million different ways, right? You can talk about race, you can talk about gender, you can talk about lifestyle choices or whatever you want to call it. But today let's just delve into the differences between black culture in America and white culture in a very honest discussion. Because lately we have seen a lot of really horrific violent crimes. If you're on Twitter at all, as I am often, you will have seen the brutal attack. This girl had her head smashed into the pavement. She's in critical condition right now, I believe. I don't think she's died. There are updates on Twitter, but absolutely brutal attack. There was, of course, in the subway in New York, a man pulled a gun. He was disarmed, and his own gun was used to shoot him. Just these brutal attacks. And if you're on Twitter a lot, you see constantly these black people being violent in America. So what the hell is going on? What the hell is going on? I don't think this was true in the 1930s. I don't think this is true even in the 1960s. I think it maybe started in the 70s, the 80s, and has gotten worse and worse. And now today, it's just ubiquitous. You see it everywhere. So what the hell's going on with the black America? We'll get to that in one moment. First, of course, I have to sell you something. Countless people are mistaking private browsing tabs as a way to stay anonymous online. It has gotten so bad that a popular web browser had to update their terms to make it clear that private browsing tabs do not stop websites from collecting your data. Even with private browsing tabs enabled, you can still be tracked by websites and internet service providers. While many tech-savvy people already know that private modes in web browsers don't make them anonymous, the average user is being misled. That's why I protect my privacy with Virtual Shield VPN. As you guys know, I've used Virtual Shield for quite a long time. And considering my personal and professional opposition to the current regime, Virtual Shield VPN is a service that I would not do without. Virtual Shield helps protect your data and finances from cyber criminals, ISPs, rogue tech companies, data mining giants, and more. With Virtual Shield's anonymous browsing, a strict no-log policy, unlimited bandwidth, and built-in malware and ad blocking, it is a world-class VPN for anyone who cares about privacy. Cover your tracks with a military-grade encryption and an industry-leading VPN starting today. Now be sure to use my link in the description below, because everyone who signs up using that link gets 67% off and a 60-day risk-free trial. Try it now before signups end by clicking on my personal affiliate link in the description below. All right, so in order to explore these ideas, I'm going to throw it to my guest today, a very special guest, good friend of mine. We're gonna go back and forth a little bit on these questions, and my guest's name is Christian Watson. Welcome to the show, Christian.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let me throw this first idea at you here. With all this violence that we keep seeing everywhere, this is the brutal question I'm going to ask you. Are black people with a large amount of African DNA, African descent, are these people inherently violent? Do they have a strong predisposition to violence more than other groups? Or is this primarily a cultural problem? And after you answer that, how do you propose we fix it?
This is actually a very old question. The reason this question will normally draw eyebrows when you first ask it is because if you look at the early 20th century, there were certain kinds of actors asking this question. Mm-hmm. Actors that had racial predispositions in their thinking.
Racists.
Sought out.
Racists were saying this.
Well, yes, and they sought out to justify their racism by way of looking at biology. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, I think that anyone who does not take into account both genetic and cultural factors in the success of any person is just not being realistic. When I say that Nigerian Americans tend to have higher SAT scores, which are a good predictor of IQ and lifetime of success, than African Americans, What does that mean? Does that mean that Nigerian Americans are of a different strain of racial superiority than Black Americans? No, the answer is very complicated.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of it has to do, I think a small percentage has to do with genetics, but I don't believe genetics are necessarily determinative of someone's actions fully. I believe their upbringing, I believe the values they're instilled with, and I believe how they see the world, what reference points they've been given, what role models they've been given, what narratives they've been given. That's actually what shapes behavior.
Mhm.
Because if it was just wholly genetic or whatever, even mostly genetic, I would expect to have seen some of the same things that are plaguing Black culture right now plague us back in, as you mentioned, the 30s, 50s, and 60s.
Mhm.
In the 1960s, the African American out of wedlock birth rate was 25%.
Mhm.
And the last data taken on this issue, I believe, in 2018, it's around 69, 68% more than any other group. That's a cultural problem
You're right.
because that wasn't always the case. And there's a lot of people that have different sources for that problem. If you listen to Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, who are brilliant economists,
Mhm.
they'll tell you in the 1960s, after LBJ's Great Society program happened, that's when this stuff started to accelerate. I don't disagree. I think they're largely correct, but it didn't begin in the 60s. It actually began in the early 1900s. There was this movement, and they were called the maternalist reformers. These were early feminists whose primary goal was to provide state support for women and children.
Uh-huh.
These people essentially believed that women needed the government to enable them to live the best life they possibly could live. The moment you convince someone that the government is going to enable them to have the best life within the family context, you automatically omit the husband.
Right.
And you
Right.
automatically omit the bonds that people need within the family to trust one another, to help one another, and also to relate to broader society. The child welfare state was the precursor to the breakdown of the family. It's all downstream from this very anti-American idea that society has an active role in making sure your family looks a certain way, acts a certain way, and is a certain way. So
Mhm.
I think that is what's done Black Americans in most certainly.
Mhm.
It's done in other groups of people in as well. I think it's done women in most certainly. That's a different conversation for a different day. And
Mhm.
as Americans, we should look at that and just ask ourselves, how did it come to the point where at a certain period of time, our ancestors were okay with this anti-American idea of family
Yeah.
being the subject of policy?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with this idea that, narcissists. There's these narcissists who think that they can be a mother better than everyone else. Jordan Peterson he tweeted this beautiful thing. He said, to a childless woman, everything is an infant. Because childless women, they want to take care of something. So what are they going to take care of? Oh, you know what I could take care of? I could take care of the blacks. I'm going to take care of the blacks. So they get this kind of mentality, I think. But so what you've said to me, which I actually find quite astonishing that you have said this, you do think, like me, that it's primarily a cultural issue, but you don't rule out the possibility that there is some kind of potentially a genetic predisposition to violence that Black people have more than, say, white people or Asians or something like this.
I always think it's good to take several different approaches when it comes to this kind of issue.
You're taking a scientific approach to it. You don't rule it out because
Right.
science.
No, I don't rule it out, but I do rule it out in terms of it being determinative of conduct.
I
Because
think
oftentimes when people say, okay, Black folks have a disposition towards violence, they're trying to say that they just can't help themselves.
Well,
They're
there's a
violent
lot
by
of there's
nature.
there's
I don't.
obviously a lot of different kinds of people within Black America, just like there's different kinds of people
Yes.
within, every kind of group.
Yes, and ultimately, one thing that is important to make, a point that's important to make, when you control for income levels and education levels and all that kind of stuff, Black Americans and white Americans look virtually the same on paper.
Mm.
When you control for poverty, Black Americans and white Americans have more in common than they don't. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of this definitely is a cultural and social. I don't believe that there is some inherent deterministic drive for Blacks to be violent. But I do believe that in a culture that glorifies violence, in a culture where there are no good role models, there is an impulse implanted within their minds that that's the proper way to do things. That is absolutely the case. And that's more concerning than anything else.
I think you're 100% right. And also, there is this bizarre idea that we have in America that if a black person commits a violent crime, it's somehow more natural or okay than if a white person does it. There's this concept of like racial justice now and all this kind of nonsense. The reason that I think it's possible that maybe there's some kind of genetic component is because I'm Scottish, right? My grandfather's Scottish, but most of my family's German. And when I spend time with my German family, we don't have a lot of violent tendencies. But my grandfather had a lot of stories about his dad being incredibly violent. And when I talk to, say, like Count Dankula, when I talk to Count Dankula, he's always got a story for me about like getting into a brawl at a bar and I ended up getting knocked out or some crazy thing. And Scotland's just a very violent place with very violent people, and Germany is not. And so I'm like, well, if there's a genetic component there, and I really believe there's a genetic component there, because when I was a child, I had a very strong temper, and I'm pretty sure that came from my Scottish side. I believe that there can be a genetic component. I don't know if that's true with the black-white thing, but I don't eliminate the possibility in my mind. The fact that we're not allowed to talk about it, though, is ridiculous. And we should be able to talk about this stuff because it doesn't, like you said, I don't look at a group of people and say, you're inferior, you're superior because you have this genetic predisposition or that genetic predisposition. So I think we need to be able to talk about this stuff. Let me move on to another subject here real quick. I used to have this friend named Liz. Liz, I pointed to this blonde girl once that we're in like a group. I said, you know that girl, I want to ask that girl out. And she says, if you date that girl, we can't be friends. This was a very good friend of mine, black woman, heavy set, not the most beautiful woman in the world, but she was funny. She was a cool chick. I used to hang out with her. And she goes, if you date that blonde girl, I can't be friends with you. And I go, why? And she goes, I can't hang around blonde girls. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she says that when she was a kid, there were these blonde girls at her school, very beautiful girls, and they made her feel terrible about herself. Now I immediately assumed that they were bullying her or something, and I was like, oh, it's terrible, like what happened? And she goes, oh no, they were really nice to me. I just saw that they were beautiful and I didn't like myself. And it took me a long time to learn to love myself, to love my black skin, to love the fact that I was a heavier girl and not to hate myself for this. But if I see a blonde girl, I just have to kind of remove myself. And I thought, that is a weird kind of resentment due to someone else's success. She has this problem because she sees them as better than her, right? And I started thinking about this on a more societal level, and white people are objectively, I would say, the most successful race on the planet. If you're going to divide people by race, which white people we try not to do, but if you are to do that, white people are very successful. Western civilization developed by white people. We invented almost everything, right? Black people in Africa didn't really invent anything that has made a huge impact in the world, historically, and they didn't really have written history for a long time. And I'm wondering, because I have a theory that some of this resentment of some of this hatred of white people, now of course this is like, the people are like brainwashed with this whole like white people are evil because of slavery, because of the civil rights movement, all this kind of stuff. White people are evil, white people are evil, white people are evil. But I'm wondering if there's also some degree of resentment just because white people have this history of, being successful in the world. And we as white people, we don't think about this. We don't think, oh, Thomas Edison invented a bunch of stuff, therefore I'm awesome. Thomas Edison's a different guy. He's not me. We think in terms of the individual. And black Americans, I've noticed, tend to think in terms of these demographic groups. We are black people in America. You are white people in America. And I'm thinking if Liz has this perception of these blonde girls being superior to her and therefore she hates them because of that, could this not possibly be part of the social divide that we have between black and white Americans? Not because white people think we're superior, but because some black people look at white people, in their heart think these people are superior to my people, and therefore I hate them.
Yeah, that is definitely the case for some people. Although I think generally a lot of black folks are inundated with the propaganda of race from when they are young. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many conversations I've had in my own personal life about the issue. And I haven't really encountered the issue personally. I've encountered racism probably about 2 or 3 times, and all of them were insignificant to my life. They had absolutely no impact on me or my happiness, something like that. And yeah, and in all honesty, it's so insignificant I don't even mention it. Right?
Right.
People are like, I'm a survivor. No, I'm not a survivor. I'm not a victim. There's nothing. There's nothing some people have certain beliefs and they're free. We're in a free country. So, but yeah, the propaganda of race is inundated into a lot of African American minds, primarily because of the unique history African Americans have in this country in terms of race. And I understand that. But the problem is, even in the worst of times, African Americans were still channeling their individualism for excellence. Look at Black Wall Street, for example. And there's several other examples of that. Even in the absolute worst of times, that wasn't the focus. Mm-hmm. But people like W.E.B. Du Bois, mm-hmm. whose thought has really become popular, he very much wanted to create like a consciousness, a racial consciousness. Mm-hmm. Right? One of his books is called The Soul of Black Folk. Mm-hmm. He wanted to create a racial consciousness by which people in the race saw themselves as part of this broader collective unit pushing towards a unified goal. Mm-hmm. When that's not the case in reality. Mm-hmm. The case in reality is that we all obviously are individuals with our own unique set of values. So yes, I think that it's a problem that a lot of African Americans definitely have. But I think tribalistic thought is a component in terms of the dynamics or racial dynamics, because not just because it's a sentiment that people have, like they just feel it naturally, but because for the past 50, 60 years of left-wing ideology, post-1960s, post-Herbert Marcuse, mm-hmm. people have been trained into activists, into thinking in terms of groups.
I don't think it helps either that any time a black person does anything of note in America today, we go, it's the first black person to do this. You know, like they go crazy. Everybody goes crazy. This is the first black person to walk across the Golden Gate Bridge. It's like, why are we celebrating that? Like with Wakanda Forever or whatever for Black Panther. Like this is the first black Marvel film, the first black comic book film. It's like no. Actually, there was Blade. Actually, it was really good, and everybody loved it. Like, did you forget about that? Like, but they make a big deal about the blackness of things. When people why not just appreciate that person did it? Why do you got to put the black thing in there? It's become so divided in America like that.
Well, there's this problem in the modern American mind. I'm going to get a little bit philosophical here. Okay. We assign substance and value to appearance. I like to say aesthetics, but we'll just say appearances for the sake of simplicity.
That's why I'm so successful.
You well, no, you're a good guy, but the hair is nice. But
sorry, I got us off track. I'm gonna delete that anyway. That was just really for your benefit. I'm just joking.
No, but oftentimes people will conflate aesthetics with substance. So we'll look at something. Let's say something gives us revulsion. Like we'll see maybe like someone that has someone that is severely disabled, and we'll be like, oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Like a burn victim or something.
But but that doesn't say anything about that person in terms of their moral value or their character.
Right.
But some people might say, oh, I'm so disgusted, let me stay away from that person. And they'll make a moral decision on the basis of how they personally feel with no reference point otherwise.
I think they do that with Trump a little bit.
It's exactly the same. Oh yeah, like for example, they will simply look at how he talks and sometimes all kind of stuff. They'll ignore the content of his ideas. They'll ignore his policy accomplishments, and they'll just say, "Oh, he sounds mean," or "He's being a bully," without actually considering the substance of his actions.
Exactly.
The same thing is true of modern day race thinking. People will assign a value to their race, whether it be black or white, and they will assume something about ethics or morality from that, and that will influence their conduct towards other people. The guy in that subway train that you talked about earlier in the intro, well, he was mentally ill, obviously, but still, he said, "I care about black people, my people. I don't care about your people." He's talking to a Latino man. Well, that's the same kind of thing. He saw some random guy on the subway. He immediately assigned certain values to him, and that influenced his conduct. So we have to stop this. This is one of the reasons why people say racial consciousness is important or white racial consciousness. I say no, because you can't assign value to appearances. You have to investigate, and you have to go deeper, and you have to understand there's something more fundamental that needs to be discovered and talked about than simply appearances.
100% agree. I 100% agree. And that is, to some degree, that is the history of racism to some degree. But I think it's a natural tendency for people to look at somebody and think that person's stupid or that person's cool or whatever it is. And you get over it as you get older. And I think that's part of just maturing and becoming a more sophisticated person. All right, let me jump into the. This is the most hardcore of hardcore questions. I'm just gonna we're gonna cut straight to the bone with this one. Do Black Americans have a lower IQ than white Europeans? And if so, what are the ramifications of this? Does it even matter? Is it an important thing in society? How do we deal with this reality if it's true? Maybe it's not true. What are your thoughts, Christian Watson?
So, man, you're really going hardcore. So it is true that if you look at a distribution chart, the average IQ for an African American is going to be lower than a white American. And the average IQ of a white American is going to be lower than an Asian American. And then the average IQ for an Asian American is going to be slightly lower than an Ashkenazi Jew. Mm-hmm. That all is objective. It's a fact. It's true. I tend not to assign value to this. And in fact, Charles Murray did an interview with John Stossel recently. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, I was never trying to assign value or moral quality to any of this. Right. I was simply presenting the data, and people freaked out. Now, Thomas Sowell did indeed review the bell curve. Mm-hmm. And he came away with the perception that it is incorrect to view this solely as a matter of unfixable genetics. Mm-hmm. Thomas Sowell, particularly in his essay, and I'll send the links if you want to have it in the show notes later, cited a group that came over from Ireland in the early 1920s, 1930s, whose average IQ was actually low when they came here. Mm-hmm. But over a few generations of being in America, it actually increased.
I mean, except for Joe Biden, of course, his remained that low.
Yeah. So there's absolutely evidence of IQ changing with culture and education. I mean, the reason why Australian Aboriginals tend to have lower IQs is because many of them refuse to be enculturated and come into society. Mm-hmm. Many of them don't want to live that way. So there's a reason on that respect. So, yeah, it's true that on average, Black IQs are lower, but do I assign any moral value to that? No. I think that the relationship between IQ, achievement, life success, it's very complicated because there are so many different intelligences that we have, some that are not even measured by IQ tests, that people in the modern day economy can turn into good lives for themselves and their families. If you're a good cook, there are a lot of Black business owners that just cook. Fried chicken, fried fish, soul food, all good stuff. They make entire industries and lives out of that for people. They enrich the community.
Yeah,
so
true.
I think that we have to, I think that IQ has been too idolized by our culture.
Oh, for sure.
Right. Yeah. In certain respects, it's important. Obviously, you want your mechanic to be able to understand numerical processing and all that good stuff. But in other respects, it's just totally, I don't want to say it's meaningless. It's just not as important as other factors.
It's really the individual that matters, I think. You know, your individual IQ matters a hell of a lot more than the social IQ. And my position has...
That's my general.
Yeah. My position has always been it doesn't really matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is because you can transcend the IQ level or whatever limitation somebody puts on you because you're in a particular group. And if you're able to transcend that, what do you care if the rest of the group, is maybe a little bit lower than average or something like that in some particular capacity? I do think it becomes more of a problem when you get to the IQ levels of some of the Africans in Africa. Like if you're in Africa, some of those IQ levels are so low, on average in those countries, that I think it's a little bit, it creates a question of how do you organize a society like that? So then maybe there is a reason. I haven't really thought through in detail those questions, but for Americans, the IQ differences aren't so significant on average that it's going to make it impossible for anyone from this particular group to be something great. In the area of affirmative action, sorry, I couldn't think.
Action. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the whole affirmative action thing. To me, it was always going to be detrimental to the people who are exceptional at what they do, if you're black and you're an exceptional airline pilot, and the airlines are bringing in black people who are not exceptional, but are in fact just brought in because they need more black people, you're going to and if the regular people know that, if everyone knows that, black, white, Asian, whoever you are, if you know that they're bringing in black people who are inferior at flying than the rest of the other pilots because they want to increase their numbers, you're going to look at every black pilot, you're going to look at every black doctor, you're going to look at every black engineer, and you're going to say, inferior. And that is, to me, that is a terrible thing to do to the professionals who are actually like top level professionals. Because you're a top level black guy, engineer, and everybody looks at you and goes, they brought you in for affirmative action, right? You're a diversity hire. That sucks, man. That's going to suck. So that's my take. That's always been my take on it.
Medical school right now, they are literally getting rid of tests and traditional means of acquiring merit and to get into medical school. They're lowering it for certain people.
Right. So you could see a time. You could see a time in the near future where white people, black people, Asians, whoever it is, goes into a hospital and says, "I don't want a black doctor," and they would be perfectly within. It would be a rational thing to do, actually.
Would it be rational? I think that no matter what doctor you have, you need to look at their record. If you're going in for a heart surgery, okay, what is his success rate? How do his patients feel after their surgery? Like, no, seriously, I think that everyone needs to like look at their individual doctor, because I'm not going to go to a doctor that has like a 50% success rate and his patients.
But people don't want to go in and do research on every single person that they work with, and in their life.
And that's a problem, Mr. Reagan. That's a problem, though. I think that America was made exceptional because we had founding fathers who were curious, intellectually curious, and the generation that they grew up in, the founding generation, not only were they intellectually curious, if you violated their morals, they would overthrow you. The Whiskey Rebellion is a good example of this. I think we need to return to that in America, the revolution of the mind, because that way we can better appreciate our country's values and reconstruct our nation from the sort of zombified version of it that it is right now.
Well, I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Yeah, everybody, we could all be better people. I just saw a meme today, somebody posted of like the way women dressed in the 1950s, just to go out for the night, and the way that they dress today. And it was like they were like in pajamas. And like it's so weird, right? Like our standards have dropped so much. I mean, some people dress up, some people look nice, and some people just don't care. All right, last question. This one's kind of a weird one, and we've kind of covered it a little bit, but I want to address the question specifically. The concept of the exceptional Negro. This is a bizarre question, but here's the reason I'm asking it. You are an exceptional human being. You know that. High IQ guy, well-spoken, a very nice person in real life, very nice person. I can tell from personal experience. I can tell you that. And so for a long time, for even back in the slave days, right, they had this concept of the exceptional Negro, right? And I think that if you watch, and you know what I'm talking about, I assume. Right.
Very much so. Yep.
So the concept was basically like, if you look at Twitter and you look at like all the black people getting in fights randomly, attacking people, brutally attacking people, and this sort of ghetto thug culture, the ebonics, the inability to speak English well, lack of education, and then you see somebody like you, Christian Watson, there can be, I think, in the mind of many people, this concept of the exceptional Negro, which is like, well, maybe some black people, for whatever reason, are just really, really smart, really, really sophisticated, much less violent. A sort of like what you would consider like a normal white person, right? And maybe the rest of them are inferior or something like that. And that was the concept for like, I don't know, 200 years or something like that. So I was just curious what you had to say about that concept.
A lot of African Americans are told that society doesn't like them. If they try to go above a certain level of action, they're acting white. That's the tree. And so they need to just stay where they are, remain comfortable, and they need to just be rebellious. Go ahead and be a rapper. Go ahead and be an athlete, make money. That's what the cultural emphasis has been on it's been like this forever, but for the past like 30, 40 years. There are a lot of potential, and there's a guy called King Randall on Twitter that does great work with troubled African-American youth. He literally has a school and a house for them, and he has amazing results. They have high test scores and everything. These are folks from broken homes, crack addict mothers, single mothers, and they are doing so well because they have the right environment. We have to give people the right environment. That's the problem. But as a culture, when these people think they're trying to help black folks by showing up at a protest and burning down their businesses, you're setting them back.
Yeah.
You're harming them. Not only that, when black folks do it, you're harming yourselves because the broader society looks at you and says, you're crazy, you're violent, you're bad. And in a sense, in that instance, they're not wrong to think that. In that instance, that's what they see you doing. So I do believe every group has an exception. But I think that the exceptional Negro, like that specific idea, is not so exceptional because there are a lot of people with a lot of potential amongst African Americans, just as there are of any race. But like most people, they don't have the right environment. They don't have the right environment.
Well, I agree with you, and I really love that idea about the environment. I'm a little bit playing devil's advocate. I like to be provocative by saying, saying things the way I say it. You know me,
Please.
But I love this idea of the right environment, and here's the thing that I think is very critical in our society generally, not just among Black Americans, but I think specifically Black Americans would be helped the most maybe by this. We need to get back to a place in our society where we care about morality, duty, the idea of having some degree of self-respect in terms of having a good job, supporting yourself, supporting a family. All that kind of traditional values that we've thrown out the window, and Democrats keep saying we don't need that stuff. Well, you've destroyed the black community in America by dismissing all this stuff and saying, well, the state can take care of you. We're wonderful. Well, look how that's worked out. So, no, I agree with you. I think if you give these black kids self-esteem, if you treat them to speak properly, if a child has pride in the way he speaks because he speaks well, that completely changes the course of their life. And what do we tell black kids?
Well,
it's okay if you talk like this. It's like, well, no, it isn't okay if you talk like that. Right? You're destroying their lives, literally destroying their lives. That's what I think. So I agree with you 100%. I think changing the environment of any group, no matter how downtrodden, how many shortcomings they have, how many problems they have, is going to amplify their potential massively. And we do. So what do you think? How do we kind of curb this violence in America? How do we give black kids self-esteem and stop them talking like idiots and, being uneducated and all this kind of stuff and like making that seem cool? Punching somebody's cooler than being educated. Well, no, it isn't. How do we change this cultural tendency in America?
No, you can change this by abolishing the welfare state, if you want my honest opinion. If you want to like slow the damage, get rid of the welfare state, get rid of food stamps, all that kind of stuff.
That is actually a very profound thing to say, because a lot of people will really hate hearing you say that. That is a controversial statement that you made.
I have supported this position since I was a teenager, and the more I read, the more I support this position. We should get rid of food stamps, all that kind of stuff. Seriously, we need to get rid of all of that, because I think that, this is a radical problem we have. This is a radical problem we have. We have entire universities catering to mediocrity. What you described was Ebonics. It's now called African American Vernacular English. They gave this kind of
they just use the letters, right? AAVE now.
Yes, Yes, they have it on like Duolingo and Pandora's Rosetta Stone. Excuse me, not Pandora Stone. Rosetta Stone.
Duolingo. That's crazy, man.
Like
that's
what?
Crazy.
So no. On a cultural level, this stuff is being pushed.
Yep.
Because to speak proper, like I'm speaking, you're speaking white. That's the idea.
You are. Yeah,
So
that's what they'll say, even though it's just English. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yes, exactly. So we have to change the cultural mindset. We have to change cultural role models. We have to get rid of welfare. We have to anything that the government does to enable this kind of behavior, to get rid of it. So we have to reinstate cash bail in many places. We have to stop treating juveniles who do violent actions as if they are children who need to be treated with kid gloves. No, they need to be handled in a way that is most appropriate. For some of them, putting them in community rehabilitation centers and having them undergo certain programs, particularly centered for black youth, there are many of them, that's the answer. For others, the answer is imprisonment, indefinite imprisonment, depending on the severity of their crime. If they want to go ahead and smash the heads of young girls into the pavement, I'm not entirely sure you have redemptive quality for society.
Yeah.
I don't think you can be rehabilitated. Or if you can, you need to prove it. And how do you prove it? I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of good literature on rehabilitation and how it works and limiting recidivism, a lot of good stuff. John Kasich, who I don't really like in all honesty, but he did some great stuff out in Ohio when he was governor in terms of rehabilitation and using that as a means to get drug rates down. So maybe that's an approach we can take. But we have to have a heavy hand with this on a cultural level, on a community level, and on a political level.
I love it.
So
I love
the
your
easiest
mentality
thing
and all
in
this.
politics-
Yeah.
The easiest thing a politician can do, get rid of food stamps and welfare state.
love it.
Just cut it. Get rid of it.
I'll tell you what, the way that, most people don't really know about this, but the way that because Europe used to be a pretty brutal place as well. People were pretty violent in Europe, in the early Middle Ages and this kind of time, even the Roman era, pre-Roman era, of course. And how did they fix this? How did they get rid of this violence in society? It was by treating criminals with a heavy hand, just as you say. And it was far more extreme than what you're suggesting. I mean, basically, if you would steal something, you were executed, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? I mean, they were brutal. We got rid of the violent, crazy people, not all of them, but many of them from the gene pool in Europe with these policies. That's how Europeans did it. And so, I think you're right. You have to go after the criminals with a great deal more ferocity than they're willing to do today. Even conservatives are willing to do, because it really does, harsh sentencing really does act as a deterrent in many cases. And in the cases that, people, like you said, people can't be redeemed, it just removes them from society. And that's really important. So I agree with you. I think that criminal justice needs to sort of stop being so touchy-feely, so nice and kind to everybody. This racial justice thing has to just be obliterated. I mean, that's ridiculous. And you're right. Get rid of the welfare state as much as we possibly can. Yeah.
One last idea too, because I think we need to have violent criminals. I have no tolerance for that. Theft, we need to take a much heavier hand on that as well. We shouldn't be saying, well, if you still below $780, you're good, like they did in San Francisco.
Just go.
No,
Yeah.
We need to have a heavier hand. You violate someone's property rights in America, a country based on property rights, you need to pay. You need to both give them back everything you stole. You need to do something. You need to pay. But another thing, though, because we can take prohibitionist stances all we want. One of the biggest destructors, in addition to the welfare state of the black family, has been the illegalization of non-violent crimes, like smoking marijuana. Bill Clinton and his wife were very big in that respect. They passed the Clinton crime bill in 1993, and that caused a lot of problems. Chuck Rangel, a Democrat, progressive, worked with the Nixon drug panels back in the 70s to penalize crack cocaine, which also led to a lot of things as well. I think that when it comes to drugs, which are most certainly a social poison, I don't support them. We have to have a different approach, because the approach we've been taking since the 70s hasn't worked in deterring. It simply worked in creating a culture of criminality, an underworld that a lot of African Americans are sucked up into. And because of that, a lot of black young men don't have their fathers. So we should work on, maybe not really focusing on locking people up for weed and stuff like that. I don't encourage use. I'm a conservative. I don't encourage use. But I do think a lot of the cultural problems are caused by an overly heavy hand on nonviolent issues and a permissive hand on violent issues.
Well, it's interesting. You finally stumbled upon a point that I completely disagree with you on. Because if you go walking through downtown LA, you will absolutely see the results of the decriminalization of drug use. And it is legit the zombie apocalypse down there. It is terrible. Nobody gets locked up for smoking weed, okay? I mean, maybe once in a blue moon. The reason people get locked up typically for smoking weed is they're engaged in other worse criminal activity. That's just a tool for the police to use for other things. Now, can police abuse these powers that they have? Yeah, of course. But they can also use it for things that they need to get done. You need to give the police a little bit of leeway here and there. Nobody really gets, these massive sentences for smoking dope. This is not really a thing. This is just a talking point that they use, the libertarians use. You got to criminalize drugs, man. You got to criminalize drugs. Otherwise, you get this massive, massive problem of people who just want to live this lifestyle of doing drugs and being homeless and like it's all cool, bro, and their lives just go to hell. It's terrible. It's really terrible.
Most of the time when it comes to drugs and drug use, the drug isn't what inspired the person to go down the life they had. It simply accelerated their descent. Most of the time, it's a sense of hopelessness, a lack of family connection, a perversion of their own values, and the drug is the accelerant to their own decline. The problem with cities like Los Angeles and Portland is not that they've decriminalized drugs. It's that not only have they decriminalized drugs, they have made it easier to use drugs by handing out needles, crack pipes, meth pipes. I don't support that. I don't encourage that. Government should not be subsidizing someone's personal destruction.
Yep.
But having said that, if you look back in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s when drug prohibition was at its heights, a large amount of African Americans were imprisoned for distribution, production, nonviolent crimes. And even if it doesn't happen today, I'm happy it doesn't happen today because people are realizing how ridiculous that was, even conservative. I mean, I used to live in the mountains of North Georgia, one of the most conservative areas ever. The sheriff there didn't prosecute marijuana, didn't care. One of the most conservative areas in the entire country. I'm happy people are seeing it, but for decades, people were locked up for nonviolent offenses that separated fathers from the family. And that, along with the welfare state, accelerated the decline of the black family. So I understand people that, want to see a society free of drugs. So do I. But oftentimes the law is not the best way to do that because all these years of drug prohibition, that hasn't changed anything. On a federal level, on several state levels, it hasn't fixed the underlying problem.
However,
we have to address the
underlying
problem.
Here's the problem. We're acting in this way where we're making assumptions about how much better it would be if things were different without the knowledge of how much better something would be, right? So you have a place that legalizes drugs. Now, there are places like in the Netherlands, like, in Amsterdam, where drugs are legal.
Portugal.
Sure,
Portugal.
And they don't have such problems, as we have in, say, like Los Angeles, where drugs are essentially legal in Los Angeles, de facto legal. So why is that, right? And you have to study those dynamics. I don't think it's as simple as you've got to decriminalize drugs. I don't think that will necessarily work in every culture, right? That's certainly not working in Los Angeles.
Bare minimum.
And
I agree.
And it also doesn't work to say you've got to take a heavy hand necessarily with these nonviolent crimes, these drug crimes. I think it's something that has to be discussed in nuance. So it's good that we brought it up. I don't think we're going to find the answer today, but it's interesting that we found a point that we disagree on. I love that because I love you. Yeah. I love having you on the show. I'm so glad that we finally got to do this. We've been talking about this for a long time. Now, Christian has a great YouTube channel. I want you to go subscribe to it right now. Pause the video. You just got to look up Christian Watson, all one word. Official C. Watson on Twitter. Go ahead and subscribe to him if you use Twitter. Great guy, great commentary. I believe you were introduced to me by Sebastian Gorka. Sebastian Gorka introduced us, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. I had interviewed him a few times on my show. He had interviewed me one time on his America First show. So it kind of all just came full circle. Absolutely.
Every time I bring up Gorka, who's like a very good friend of mine, there are some degenerates in the comments that go, "Why are you friends with that, Israel-loving Gorka?" Or something. They'll always say something negative. And Gorka is one of the best men I have ever met. So if you don't like Gorka, there's something wrong with you. I mean, you definitely have a misperception of reality. And is there anything that you wanted to leave the audience with? Anything that you want to close with in particular?
Yeah, no. First of all, Chris, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm thankful, and this has been a very good conversation. Hopefully we can have many more in the future. But I want people to think not just more critically, but more courageously about the issue of race in America, because it's an issue that scares a lot of people into either silence or submission to the cultural mob, and that's not a way we have a good country. That's not the way we continue the civilization that was based off of the fact that we were willing to courageously speak up against a tyranny that had for years been presumed to be the normal thing. No. We should base our understanding of truth on foundational value, on what is objectively true, on, if I even dare say, and this is going to be controversial, on God's design, rather, for our conduct and things of that sort, not simply on cultural issues that we tend to have a liking to or we don't have a liking to. So that's my last message.
I absolutely love it. We need to stop being afraid to acknowledge ugly truths, to do away with the beautiful lies, and to discuss difficult topics, and not be afraid to be called a racist if you're a white person. Because at the end of the day, look, I brought up a lot of subjects with you that if a person from the outside heard me say that, they would probably say, oh, that guy's a racist, right? But I don't care. I don't care if you call me a racist. You know why? Because I want to talk through the real issues of our society. If we're gonna help out Black Americans, really, like if you got this white savior syndrome, you want to help out Black Americans, you got to figure out what the actual problems are, and that means having these difficult discussions. And the reality is, racism is not really that big of a problem in America, at least not from white people. Like most white people realize, I have more in common with Christian Watson than I do most probably white people in America. And we're two different races, right? But come in, give me a break. Nobody cares about that stuff. Have the discussions, have the conversations.
I agree. I have more in common with you than I do a lot of people that look like me. And that's just a matter of values. It's a matter of values. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, God-fearing Americans unite. That's what I say.
Yeah.
There's this war on, what is it, Christian nationalism now? Like this is like this scary thing on the left. It's ridiculous. But that's a topic for another day. I'm so glad to have you on the show, man. All right, thanks again, Christian, for coming on the show. And remember, folks, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much. That is not so. Good night. You like how I close the show? It's great, right?
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm happy we did this. Hopefully my answers were sufficient.
Oh, they were more than sufficient. You were great, man. Yeah, you said some things that were kind of bombshell things. Loved having you on the show. And let's chat on Twitter.
Let me know when this is out. Let me know when this is out.
Okay, cheers, man.
All right. I'll see you, man.
The goal for all of us should be that one day things will be done neither because of nor in spite of any of the differences between us, ethnic differences or racial differences, whatever they may be, that we will have total equal opportunity for all people. And I would do everything I could in my power to bring that about.